Hey guys, tonight we tumble back through the velvet-draped corridors and candlelit conspiracies of Tudor England. You're standing in the drafty halls of a royal palace, the air thick with the scent of rosewater, smoke, and fear. Just beyond the tapestry, someone's always listening. Somewhere down the corridor, a quill scratches ominously. A girl in satin slippers and a too-big crown is learning how to survive in a world where even family dinners come with a side of betrayal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love seeing who's falling asleep to Tudor drama from across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not just any courtier tonight. You're glued to the skirts of a flame-haired teen named Elizabeth Tudor. And believe me, you probably won't survive this, because most people around her didn't. Intrigue, plague, a paranoid sister queen, and enough religious whiplash to make your head spin faster than a Catholic to Protestant Sunday morning swap. This girl's early life was a high-stakes obstacle course with zero reset button. You're 11 years old, and your mother has just been executed. Welcome to Elizabeth's childhood. Anne Boleyn, sharp-tongued, controversial, a bit of a social climbing icon, has just had her head removed by a French swordsman, chosen for his clean cut. That's the last gift Henry VIII gives her. Elizabeth, once heir to the throne, is now declared illegitimate, a political football, and very much alone. You grow up in scattered households, shuffled between caregivers like a too-hot teacup. One minute, you're playing with dolls in a manor house, the next, your latest stepmother has fallen out of favor or mysteriously died. Henry marries 6 times, but parental stability? Not exactly on the menu. Still, you're sharp. You learn Latin, French, Italian, and even a bit of Greek. You read voraciously, flirt cautiously, and, crucially, observe everything. You're not just playing with your governess's embroidery hoop, you're memorizing everyone's tells, from the way a noble lies with his smile to the creak in a betrayer's boot step. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's early trauma hardened her emotionally or made her more cautious in power. Either way, you're learning that the only thing more dangerous than being royalty is being almost royalty. When your father finally dies, the game shifts again. Your younger brother, Edward VI, becomes king at 9. 9. That's not even enough candles for a proper cake, but sure, let's hand him a kingdom. You're suddenly part of the political background noise, valuable, visible, and vulnerable. Then Edward dies at 15. Enter your sister Mary, Queen Mary I, aka Bloody Mary to later generations. No, not the cocktail, though you may want one, is devoutly Catholic and sees you, Protestant-leaning, charismatic, suspiciously intelligent, as a threat. Worse, people start whispering that you should be queen instead. Not helpful. Now imagine this, you're 20 and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Not just in any cell, but the same one where your mother awaited her execution. You watch the damp walls and wonder if the tower's ravens remember your face. It's cold. You're interrogated for weeks, accused of conspiring against Mary in Wyatt's rebellion. You insist you knew nothing. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you did. Either way, you do not break. You cry when no one sees. You write long, strategic letters to the Queen that walk a tightrope between submission and sly defiance. And then, somehow, you survive. Mary spares you, maybe out of guilt, maybe because there's not quite enough proof. You're released but kept under house arrest. More embroidery, more tension, more hidden watchers. But you keep studying. History, strategy, language, human behavior. You've learned by now that knowledge is insulation. And your mind? It's a steel trap wrapped in velvet. Quirky side note, Elizabeth had a parrot. Historians still debate whether it was given as a gift during this period or later. But you can imagine the comfort of a bird that talks back when the walls get too silent. The court is a dangerous stage, and you've learned to walk it like a dancer, precise, graceful, always aware of your exits. You read Machiavelli. You perfect the art of the non-answer. You smile without showing your teeth. When Mary finally dies in 1558, the kingdom is weary of bloodshed and burning. You're 25, unmarried, untested, and suddenly holding the crown, and just like that, you go from pawn to queen. Now, try not to panic. The kingdom is broke. The religious divide is about to crack the walls. You're a woman in a man's world, and half the nobles expect you to trip over your skirts and marry someone useful immediately. Instead, you do something unprecedented. You pause. You don't rush into marriage. You don't immediately slaughter your enemies. You start by gathering trusted advisors, like William Cecil, who becomes your chief fixer and father figure, and listening. Really listening, you re-establish the Church of England with just enough compromise to calm the masses. You issue moderate proclamations, assure foreign ambassadors you're not about to upend everything, and slowly, meticulously, build your image. And that image? Controlled, calculated, and captivating. You dress like a queen out of legend, silks, pearls, white lead makeup, yes, the toxic stuff, fashion over function, and a glare that can freeze the Thames. Mainstream historians agree, her early reign was defined by cautious brilliance. But what they often gloss over is just how vulnerable she was. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, one noble with a well-placed dagger. And it would have all ended before the legend began. Instead, you start to master the impossible, ruling as a woman in a world that barely believed women could rule at all. You haven't even begun to show your full power yet, but already, the court is humming with a different energy. They say you have your mother's eyes. They say your speeches stir something deep. They say the Virgin Queen is clever enough to dodge every trap, so far, and you just sip your wine, raise one of those infamous eyebrows, and let them wonder what you'll do next. You sit on the throne now, stiff-backed and radiant in a sea of velvet and suspicion. England expects you to pick a husband any moment, ideally someone with muscles, a crown, or at least a solid military. But you have other ideas. It's the mid-1500s, and marriage isn't romance. It's power. Signing a marriage contract might as well be handing over your scepter. Your counselors press you. Foreign envoys hover like crows with ring boxes. Parliament's practically screaming, marry now, or we're doomed. And yet, you stall, you smile. You flirt. You entertain endless proposals with the amused patience of someone watching a toddler play chess. You praise the suitors. You wink at them. But you never say yes. You're not just resisting marriage, you're rewriting the rules of womanhood in real time. Your most persistent suitor is Robert Dudley. Childhood friend. Dashing courtier. Owner of cheekbones so sharp they could open letters. He's the subject of scandalous court gossip, especially after his wife mysteriously dies by falling down a staircase with the kind of bruising pattern that makes modern historians frown deeply. Historians still argue whether you were in love with him, whether he plotted his wife's death, or whether it was just tragic timing and Tudor paranoia doing its thing. But one thing's clear, you kept Dudley close, emotionally and literally. You gave him rooms next to yours. You made him master of the horse, which sounds like a stable gig, but really means he was your public companion at every major event. You never married him. You never married anyone. Instead, you married England. That's not just a dramatic flourish. You actually say it, to Parliament, to the people, and most effectively, to yourself. You claim to be wedded to your kingdom, a queen whose virginity becomes political armor. You rebrand personal privacy as public virtue. Suddenly, you're not just a spinster, you're Gloriana, the untouched icon of national pride. Quirky historical tidbit, you even had portraits painted where you wore a serpent on your sleeve, symbolizing wisdom and cunning, and held a sieve, the Roman symbol of virginity. That's right. You turned your single status into state propaganda, complete with allegorical accessories. It's a risky strategy, but it works, because while all eyes are on your non-existent love life, you're quietly doing the real work. You strengthen the currency, stabilize the treasury, and reform the navy. You surround yourself with sharp minds, Cecil, Walsingham, Bacon. Men who will lie, bribe, and, if necessary, assassinate in your name, but always with a wink and a Latin motto, and you travel. Not out of England. You're famously homebound, but across it. Progresses, they're called. You tour the countryside with your court, setting up camp in noble homes, and absolutely draining their pantries and wine cellars in the process. It's part PR stunt, part surveillance, and part psychological warfare, because when the Queen shows up at your manor, you don't plot rebellion. You polish the silver and keep your mouth shut. You also keep dangling those suitors. Like Prince Eric of Sweden. He sends lavish gifts, desperate letters, and enough flattery to melt a glacier. You never meet him. Then there's the Duke of Anjou, a Frenchman with ruffles, ambition, and very little support from your Protestant subjects. You come close, really close, to marrying him. But in the end, you don't. It's like you're playing this massive, international edition of The Bachelor, but you never hand out a final rose. People criticize. They mutter. They write pamphlets. But you hold fast. Because you understand something they don't. Marriage is surrender. Once you're someone's wife, you're no longer just Elizabeth. You're his queen. His property. His tool. And you've dodged too many axes and poison goblets to hand your neck over now. Still, the pressure never stops. Parliament sends you petitions. Ambassadors beg. You tell them what they want to hear, then slip out the side door. You start speaking in riddles. My heart and my realm are one. I am already bound to a husband, the kingdom. If I follow the inclination of my nature, it is this, beggar woman and single and queen and married. You speak like prophecy. Like myth. Like someone untouchable. You're not just ruling. You're performing. The court becomes your stage. Your suitors, your props. And your people. They start to believe. The idea of the Virgin Queen takes root. She's untouchable, sacred, divine, like some glittering icon you might light a candle for. But here's the kicker, you're still human. In private, you rage. You cry. You throw things. You mourn the children you'll never have. You envy your ladies-in-waiting as they marry and vanish. But then you put on the ruff, the jewels, the powdered face, and walk out like the sun. Mainstream historians note how your calculated celibacy gave you political freedom. But behind that is a lonely truth. Power means sacrifice. You gave up love. You gave up normalcy. You gave up everything soft and ordinary to survive this brutal, glittering game, and maybe that's why the myth worked. Because even your enemies sense the cost. You are not soft. You are not married. You are not yours. You belong to England now. And every time you refuse another prince with that sly, diplomatic smile, you're not just buying time, you're reinforcing your reign, because the day you say I do, they'll all stop listening, so you keep them waiting, year after year. Until they stop asking and start calling you something else entirely, not Queen Elizabeth. Not Her Majesty, but simply the Queen. Now you're firmly on the throne, but you're sitting on a powder keg made of lace and lit fuses. Welcome to court life under Queen Elizabeth I, a place where flattery is currency, dance partners are spies, and one bad curtsy might get you vanished. Every morning, you rise not with the sun, but with the servants, dozens of them, tiptoeing through your chamber, layering gowns, paints, jewels, and expectations on you. The royal face isn't born. It's manufactured. You sit for hours as your ladies-in-waiting apply layers of white lead makeup, yes, actual poison, to maintain your porcelain look. Your hair is stiffened into elaborate styles, wigs powdered until they smell faintly of lavender and melted beeswax. You emerge not as a woman, but as an idea, glowing, untouchable, unknowable. This is the stage, and your court. It's the show. Every hallway conversation is layered with subtext. Lovely weather means I'm watching you. A smile can be a threat. A misplaced glance might land you in the tower. The nobles all want something. Land, titles, proximity. And you? You want loyalty. Or silence. You rule not with brute force, but with performance. You orchestrate masks, pageants, and endless dances. Foreign envoys report back not on your laws, but on your dress, your demeanor, your laugh, and behind the gold-threaded curtains. It's not so glamorous. Whispers of poison travel faster than gossip. Plots fester in banquets. A courtier might smile and pass you a goblet, while someone else dips their ring into powdered arsenic. You never eat without a taster. Your food is prepared under guard. And still, your hands tremble sometimes when you lift your cup, because you know what happened to your mother. You remember what it means to be too confident. Historians still debate how many assassination attempts were real and how many were theater. But the fear? That was real enough, and then there are the letters, so many letters. You read each one with precision, ciphered reports from spies, veiled threats from Catholic nobles, romantic drivel from exiled lords trying to sweet-talk their way back into favor. You dictate replies while pacing, correcting every phrase, ensuring nothing could be misread. Because here's the truth, everything is politics now. Even your handwriting, quirky detail for your sleepy brain, you had notoriously terrible penmanship. Even your counsel complained. But they still framed your notes like holy relics. Despite all the pomp, court is suffocating. The air is scented with lavender, but it stinks of ambition. You sometimes vanish for hours, retreating into your private chambers to read. To write, to think. Even queens need to exhale, but you can never stay gone for long. Because if you don't command the court's attention, someone else will. And if that happens, well, that's how heads roll. So you return, you glide through the marble halls like a storm in satin. You lock eyes with that earl who got too cozy with Spain. You mention your new intelligence chief in passing. You drop hints that maybe, just maybe, you know everything. They squirm. They bow. They change their tune. You haven't said a word of accusation. You don't need to, because in your court, power lives in silence. Now picture this, it's the height of summer, and you're hosting a banquet. The candles flicker like fireflies. The ceiling is so high it echoes. There's music, laughter, peacock pie, yes, an actual roasted peacock, feathers and all, and every courtier trying not to choke on their anxiety. Suddenly, a noble faints. Whispers erupt, poison. Or heatstroke, you pretend not to notice. You sip your wine. And just before dessert, you make a vague announcement about loyalty being a sweeter dish than treachery. No one eats dessert. This isn't paranoia. This is survival. Every so often, you promote someone unexpected, a low-born scholar, a sharp-tongued lawyer, just to keep the aristocrats guessing. You know how to shuffle the deck. You also maintain a personal network of spies, led by the chilly genius Francis Walsingham. He recruits schoolboys, tavern keepers, even actors. You watch as plots are uncovered, letters intercepted, and double agents turned. Walsingham once used a beer barrel to smuggle coded messages. Another time, he staged a fake assassination plot just to catch real conspirators. It's like the Tudors invented MI6, but with more lace. Historians agree, your court was one of the most dangerous and sophisticated political theaters in English history. But here's what they don't always say, you loved it, you thrived in the game, because yes, it was deadly. Yes, it was exhausting. But you were born in fire. This was your element, every victory, every compliment, every fearful glance from a noble, it meant you'd won another day, and sometimes, that was enough. There's also the fashion wars. You set strict dress codes, not just for style, but for control. Only certain colors for certain ranks. Only specific fabrics for specific incomes. You even regulated how wide a ruff could be. A rebellious collar was a political statement, and every time someone tried to upstage you, you simply wore more. More jewels. More pearls. More embroidery. There were rumors that your wardrobe took up dozens of rooms. And if someone dared to wear the same color, well, they'd find themselves banished from court for a month or two. That's the thing about power, it's in the details. Remember that white face paint we mentioned? It covered not just blemishes but time itself. As you aged, you used more of it. Your hair thinned, so you added wigs. Your teeth decayed, clove oil and a tight-lipped smile kept secrets hidden. By now, you're in your 30s, then 40s, in Tudor England, that's basically ancient, but instead of fading, you become more theatrical, more mythical, more queen. You give speeches that ripple across Europe. You dodge marriage offers like a fencer. You toy with your courtiers like a cat with a room full of mice, and behind all that, you're tired, but you'll never show it, because the court watches everything, and if you flinch, the wolves close in. You sit beneath a tapestry of golden lions and red roses, your fingers still slightly ink-stained from correspondence. Outside, the wind carries the sick-sweet stench of disease, and somewhere, a bell tolls low for another soul claimed by plague. Inside the palace, you tighten your grip on your reign, because even now, as a queen, the game never truly rests. You've survived youth. Dodged marriage. Danced with diplomats. But now, real storm clouds gather. The threats aren't just letters in cipher or poisoned fruit trays, they're armies. Fleets. National grudges hardening into declarations. The year is 1562. You're 29, and the smallpox comes for you. It starts with chills. Then the rash. Then the high, vicious fever. You lie in your bed at Hampton Court, trembling. Your face, your legacy, your crown, all hang in the balance. Your court is paralyzed. You name no heir. If you die, England dies with you, splintering into civil war between Protestant hopefuls and Catholic vultures. You survive. Barely. Your skin scars. You lose chunks of your famous red hair. And when you return to court weeks later, every courtier holds their breath, and you pretend nothing happened. You add thicker powder. Taller wigs. Bigger gowns, because if the queen can bleed, then England can fall. Smallpox changed you. You begin ruling not just with charm, but with steel. You now know how fragile your grip on the world is, and how determined you'll have to be to keep it. There are border wars. Piracy disputes. France breathing down your neck with armies and alliances. But worst of all, Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary is Catholic. Married into France. Crowned in Scotland. And, most dangerously, she has a claim to your throne. The Pope favors her. Catholic Europe whispers her name like a prophecy. And back in England, discontented nobles begin writing it in candlelit corners. Mary is everything you're not, married, anointed in Catholic rites, and, in many eyes, legitimate. Historians still argue whether you ever truly hated her or simply feared the chaos she represented. But either way, your instinct is clear: keep her close, but caged. When she's forced to flee Scotland, she rides south, seeking refuge. You give her a welcome fit for a prisoner. Mary becomes your guest. In a very secure manner. With armed guards. For 19 years, you can't kill her. Not yet. It would send the Catholic world into a frenzy. But you can keep her quiet. Mostly, Meanwhile, you deal with the fallout of rebellion. In 1569, the northern earls, Catholic nobles with too many titles and not enough common sense, rise up, hoping to depose you and install Mary. They gather thousands. March on cities. Shout Latin prayers, you send your army. You crush them, then you do something terrifying, you execute over 750 rebels. Publicly. Brutally. Without blinking. It's not just punishment. It's performance. You're reminding everyone, the Queen has claws. One courtier later writes that you wept privately afterward. That you hated the blood. That you mourned the necessity, but in public, you stand tall, painted and jeweled, voice cold as iron. Then, just as things begin to settle, plague returns, sweeping through London like judgment. It closes theaters, empties churches, and turns water into death. You flee the city, leading a traveling court that leaves a trail of expenses and garlic behind. Quirky fact, one of your plague avoidance methods included chewing sugar-laced violets and insisting all rooms be smoked with herbs. Modern science says, ineffective. Elizabethan confidence says, priceless. Still, while others panic, you write letters. Sign edicts. You read reports by candlelight and sign them with a steady hand. You make speeches in ruffled collars and steel your nerves, because no matter how many bells toll, the Queen must never tremble. Through it all, you begin building something new, a navy. England's coastline, long left vulnerable, is slowly fortified. You pour funds into shipbuilding, support piracy disguised as exploration, and surround yourself with sea-loving upstarts like John Hawkins and Francis Drake. You don't just need ships. You need symbols, and these men, flamboyant, clever, dangerous, become the face of English daring. You give them vague licenses to intercept Spanish ships. They return with chests of gold and tales of sea monsters. You raise a royal eyebrow and pretend to scold them, but really, you smile, because each coin they steal, each ship they torch, weakens your greatest threat. Spain, King Philip II, widower of your sister Mary, hates you with a passion colder than his palace walls. He considers you a heretic. A usurper. A scandal in skirts, and you keep poking the bear. You let pirates raid his treasure fleets. You support Dutch rebels against him. You ban Jesuit priests, then execute the ones who sneak in. He watches. He fumes, and you. You wait, because you know what's coming. The war hasn't arrived yet. But it will. The ships are being built. The saints are being prayed to. The Catholic kings are sharpening their daggers. You just keep smiling. Meanwhile, the people begin to adore you. Your speeches, your image, your silver tongue, all turn you from monarch to myth. You ride out in armor. You walk among the sick briefly, and with enough garlic to kill a vampire. You attend sermons. You wink at children. You kneel before no man. Your legend begins to glow, and in the background, always, is the pressure to name an heir, but you don't, because once you name one, your enemies flock to them. So instead, you keep the kingdom in suspense. Mainstream historians agree, this strategy maintained peace, barely. But it also created an atmosphere of tension so thick you could slice it with a cake knife. Every day, someone asks what comes next, and every day, you give them the same answer, I am married to England. And she alone will bear my legacy. You stand before your mirror, a figure sculpted by politics and powder. The light glints off pearls stitched into your gown, dozens of them, each one symbolizing the purity you've made your brand. But purity, you know, is a stage act. And you? You're the greatest performer the English throne has ever seen. It started quietly, this transformation. A nickname here. A flattering poem there. Soon, you weren't just Queen Elizabeth. You were the Virgin Queen, and no one doubted it, because you made sure they didn't. You leaned into it like a seasoned showman. You turned what they mocked, your unmarried status, your lack of children, your solitude, into sacred symbols of divine rule. You didn't have a husband. Good. That meant no man ruled you. You didn't have an heir. Perfect. That meant no one could challenge your authority from the shadows. You held up your virginity like Excalibur, and you wielded it just as sharply. Your court became an engine of myth-making. Portraits depicted you with crowns of stars, serpents of wisdom, the globe beneath your hand. One even showed you standing on a map of Europe, because subtlety was for lesser monarchs. You were virginity incarnate, pure, untouchable, and inexplicably draped in about 25 layers of symbolism and tulle. Mainstream historians point to this image crafting as one of your greatest political triumphs. And they're not wrong. You knew that England was insecure, divided, and nervous about female rule. So, you gave them a queen who was more than human. You gave them Gloriana, a monarch who belonged to no man, no faction, no flaw. Of course, in private, the seams were messier. You had tempers. Epic ones. Courtiers learned to read your mood like sailors studying clouds. A furrowed brow could mean exile. A sigh could trigger a marriage proposal. Once, you threw a slipper at a courtier who disagreed with you, though to be fair, he was being especially irritating. You demanded complete loyalty, not just politically, but emotionally. If one of your ladies-in-waiting married without your consent, gone. Banished. If a favored noble grew too bold, too confident, you clipped their wings. Robert Dudley, yes, that Robert, once lost favor for weeks after getting too close to your cousin. You weren't just queen. You were the sun. And anyone who dared cast a shadow found themselves scorched. Still, you had a core group of favorites, men you flirted with, teased, promoted, punished, and forgave. Dudley, of course. Francis Walsingham, your cold-eyed spymaster. William Cecil, your eternal fixer. Later, the flamboyant and impulsive Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. Quirky aside, you once gifted Essex a jewel-encrusted sword and, on another occasion, boxed his ears in front of the entire court. That's emotional range. These men orbited you like moons, bright, erratic, and wholly dependent on your favor. And you? You kept them close but never too close. You knew the line between affection and leverage, and you walked it with the precision of a cat crossing a windowsill, and yet, even with all the pageantry, the rituals, the carefully curated image of godlike virginity, there were always whispers. Was she really a virgin? Did she and Dudley? Was it all just theater? Historians still argue this, and they always will. Some point to letters, glances, cryptic diary entries. Others to the strict surveillance you maintained over your personal chambers. But the truth is, no one knows. And that was your greatest trick of all, because while the world debated your virtue, it never questioned your rule. While they whispered about your bedchambers, you signed treaties. While they counted your suitors, you counted ships. You mastered the art of misdirection, and nowhere was this more evident than in your foreign affairs. While you used your body as a symbol, you used your mind as a weapon. Take the marriage negotiations with the Duke of Anjou. You let the French court believe it might happen. You even publicly held hands with him, causing the English court to all but faint. But deep down, you likely knew it would never happen. Still, you played it out. Weeks. Months. Years, because every moment Anjou believed he might be your husband, France stayed friendly. Spain stayed cautious. And England stayed safe. You turned your suitors into shields, even your letters played the game. You signed them with phrases like your loving sister and cousin or your most devoted servant depending on who was reading, and what they needed to hear. You had entire paragraphs devoted to flattery that said absolutely nothing. Your pen danced like a swordsman. Quirky historical tidbit, you once told Parliament, though I be but a woman, I have the heart and stomach of a king. And then, chef's kiss, you reminded them you weren't afraid of any prince of Europe. Drop the mic, Liz. the Virgin Queen branding also served a domestic purpose. It calmed religious tensions. Protestants could see you as a new Deborah, leading the faithful. Catholics, at least the less militant ones, could imagine you as a chaste ruler who might still marry the right, Catholic, prince someday. And Puritans? Well, they hated theater, but they respected a woman who wasn't polluted by man. You became all things to all people. And none of them at the same time, but that myth had a cost. As you aged, the pressure increased. You were expected to stay frozen in time, beautiful, flawless, virginal. You had portraits corrected to make you look younger. You banned images that showed wrinkles or tired eyes. You required flattery the way others needed food, and still, the years passed, your friends aged. Your rivals died. Your ladies married and left. Even Dudley, after decades at your side, died in 1588. You found his final letter among your things days later. You labeled it his last letter and kept it in a locked box for the rest of your life, because even queens have hearts, but you never let the world see that part. You returned to your audience chamber. Straightened your ruff. Painted over the grief, because the show must go on, and as long as the Virgin Queen ruled, England was safe, or at least, that's what you needed everyone to believe. The air is thick with incense and tension. Somewhere in a candlelit church in Rome, a man raises a quill and damns you to hell. It's 1570, and Pope Pius V has just issued a papal bull excommunicating you, Elizabeth Tudor, Queen of England, from the Catholic Church. It's called Regnans in Excelsis, which sounds fancy, but really means, this woman is not just wrong. She's enemy number one. And now, all good Catholics are absolved from loyalty to you. In fact, they're encouraged, expected, to remove you from the throne by any means necessary. No pressure. This is where the game changes. Before, you were a Protestant queen with Catholic critics. Now, you're a heretic queen with a target on your back the size of a cathedral door. You're not just unpopular in Rome, you're an open invitation to assassination, and guess what? The plots start immediately. You wake up each day knowing someone somewhere is probably trying to kill you. A poisoned glove. A dagger hidden in a bouquet. A coded letter smuggled into a chicken pie. This is your life now, but you don't blink. You adapt, you double down on espionage. You authorize Francis Walsingham to do whatever it takes. His agents are everywhere, students, priests, innkeepers, actors. He builds code-breaking teams, invents fake plots to catch real ones, and intercepts thousands of letters, many of them soaked in lemon juice to hide their secrets. Your court becomes a nest of invisible knives. You install secret trapdoors, false walls, one-way mirrors. Nobles joke that the palace listens more than it speaks, and they're not wrong. One famous case, the Ridolfi plot. Named after Roberto Ridolfi, an Italian banker who thought it'd be clever to have you assassinated and Mary, Queen of Scots, crowned in your place with Spanish help. The plan. Simultaneous uprisings, followed by a nice clean beheading. The result. Walsingham catches wind of it. The conspirators are arrested. Executed. Heads roll. Mary is shaken. Spain is furious. You throw a mask. Historians still argue whether this is when you truly began to harden, when the weight of betrayal and survival turned you from cautious queen into a calculating force of nature. But the pattern is clear. Someone plots. You discover it. You let the world watch them fall, and then you go right back to dancing. But even with your spy web, the Catholic threat keeps escalating. There's a Jesuit underground now, priests disguised as merchants or tutors, sneaking into England with rosaries and revolutionary fervor. Your government calls them traitors in cassocks. Your laws become harsher. Hiding a priest is treason. Attending Mass is punished. Recusants, Catholics who refuse to attend Anglican services, are fined, imprisoned, sometimes tortured. It's not pretty, and here's the thing, you don't like it. You're not a fanatic. You say over and over, I do not seek to make windows into men's souls. You're not burning heretics like your sister Mary did. You just want order. Control. Peace, but the world keeps forcing your hand. In 1581, Parliament passes the Act to retain the Queen's Majesty's subjects in their due obedience. Catchy name, right? It basically says, if you deny Elizabeth's supremacy or support the Pope, you're in big trouble. Still, the plots don't stop, the Throckmorton plot. The Perry plot. And finally, the Babington plot, the most famous of them all, Anthony Babington. A young Catholic noble, writes to Mary, Queen of Scots, offering to free her and help murder you. The letters are smuggled in, get this, inside beer barrels, then hidden in the stoppers. Cute, but Walsingham knows, he has the letters intercepted, copied, and delivered anyway. He lets Mary write back. He lets her implicate herself. Then he pounces, and this time, there's no saving Mary. You struggle with the decision. You delay. You pace your chamber, rereading the evidence. You've held off for years, 19, remember, but now, it's clear. As long as she lives, your enemies have hope, so you sign the death warrant, and then. You hesitate, you tell your secretary not to send it. Maybe you'll change your mind, but he does, and on a grey February morning in 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, walks into the Great Hall at Fotheringhay Castle wearing red, the Catholic colour of martyrdom. She kneels. She forgives her executioners. She places her head on the block, one swing. Then two. Then three. It was messy, her little dog runs from beneath her skirts, whimpering. It's done, you're told after the fact. You go silent. Then furious. You shout. You weep. You imprison the secretary who sent the warrant, but it's too late. The world has seen what you've done. Historians still debate whether you meant for Mary to die or simply wanted someone else to bear the blame. But the effect is the same, the final rival claimant is gone, the Catholics don't forgive, and neither does Spain. Now we get to the real fun part, the Spanish Armada. In 1588, King Philip II decides enough is enough. He builds a fleet. Not just any fleet, the Armada. Over 130 ships. Thousands of soldiers. The plan? Invade England, depose you, restore Catholicism, and maybe pick up some English silverware along the way. You're outnumbered. Outgunned. Your navy is smaller, cobbled together, barely ready, but you've got heart, you've got fire ships, quick captains, and the world's most powerful motivational speech. On August 8, 1588, you ride out to Tilbury in armor, surrounded by troops. You stand before them, your soldiers, your subjects, and say, I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too. Mic dropped. Morale boosted, then nature steps in, the Armada is battered by storms. English ships harass it up the coast. Supplies dwindle. Communication fails. And eventually, the mighty fleet limps back to Spain, broken and scattered. You don't gloat, well, not much, you hold a Thanksgiving service. You commission paintings. You create a medal that says, God blew and they were scattered. Subtle, Liz. Real subtle, and just like that, you go from myth to legend, the Virgin Queen who stood against the Pope, the priests, and the most powerful king in Europe and won. But you're not done, not yet, because now that you've survived the Armada, everyone wants to know what you'll do next, and you're already lacing up your best velvet heels. The wind still whispers of cannon smoke and salt, but you're already dancing again, figuratively, of course, though the occasional galliard hasn't lost its appeal. The year is 1589, and you, Elizabeth Regina, are basking in the golden afterglow of victory over the Spanish Armada. Your people cheer louder, poets write faster, and court painters rush to immortalize your triumphant stare, and yet. Beneath the fanfare, things start to change. You're 55 now, not ancient by our standards, but in Tudor England, that's the stuff of legends. You're older than most of your council. Older than your remaining suitors. You've reigned for decades, but the crown is heavier than it once was. It presses down, not just with age, but with expectation. Still, you remain the center of gravity. All eyes still follow you, but now some of them are calculating. There's Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, your latest favorite. He's charming, hot-headed, and 19 years your junior. The court whispers. Of course it does. You call him your sweet Robin. You dote on him. You forgive his arrogance. And he, in return, basks in your favor like a cat in a shaft of royal sunlight. But Essex is no Dudley, he's ambitious. Restless. Less clever than he thinks. And he has a dangerous habit of forgetting that your favor is borrowed, not earned. Historians still debate whether you were in love with him. Or simply enjoyed the power his adoration gave you. What they agree on, it was a volatile bond. Think flint and steel, sparks guaranteed, fire inevitable. Meanwhile, your enemies aren't exactly napping. Though the Armada failed, Spain hasn't gone home to cry over sea charts. Philip II continues to fund Catholic plots, harass your merchant ships, and dream of your downfall. France is also a mess, religious wars, rival claimants, and an on-again, off-again friendship with England depending on whether they're winning that week, and Ireland? Oh, Ireland is a disaster. You've never had full control there, and now rebellions keep popping up like mold in a Tudor kitchen. Gaelic lords challenge English rule, refuse your Protestant reforms, and generally prefer swords to sermons. You send Essex there in 1599 to fix things. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. Instead of crushing the rebellion, he makes a truce. Without your permission. Then, brace yourself, he leaves Ireland and marches into London without royal orders, bursting into your bedchamber before you're properly bewigged. You're livid, you strip him of titles. You place him under house arrest. The boy who once brought you trinkets now brings you betrayal. It's not just personal. It's political. Because for the first time in years, the court sees your power waver. They start murmuring, who will come next? Who will rule when the queen is gone? You still refuse to name an heir, your body grows thin. Your walk's shorter. You rely more on wigs, more on paint. You control your image with the desperation of someone who knows that once the myth fades, so does the monarchy. Quirky tidbit, you even banned all unflattering portraits. Artists had to submit drafts to a committee for approval. One brushstroke of sagging jowl. Into the fire it went. Still, the Essex drama won't die quietly. In 1601, he stages a full-blown rebellion. A ridiculous, doomed effort involving a band of underfunded supporters. Confused citizens, and zero actual strategy. He tries to seize London. Tries to spark an uprising. Tries, foolishly, to leverage his past closeness to you, but you are not the girl he flirted with, you are the queen, and when the dust settles, Essex is arrested, tried for treason, and sentenced to death. You delay. You hesitate. The past pulls at your sleeve, but the crown does not forgive weakness. You sign the warrant. Essex is beheaded on Tower Green. You lock yourself away afterward. For days. Maybe weeks. No one knows exactly how long you mourned, or what words you whispered alone, but when you return to court, you're changed, less sparkle. More silence, more shadows in your eyes. Meanwhile, time does what it always does, it keeps moving. You're nearly 70 now. Your friends are dead. Your enemies are quieter, but still breathing. Spain loses its taste for war. France settles its chaos. The world turns, and you, still in pearls, still powdered like frost, watch from your gilded perch. You speak less in public. You leave fewer notes in your own hand. But you still command, and the people. They still love you, not just for your victories, but for your presence. You've been queen so long that no one remembers anything else. You are England, and England is you, but even myths get tired. In your final year, you become withdrawn. You stop eating. You sit on cushions on the floor rather than your throne. You don't sleep. Your doctors whisper. Your ladies try to cheer you with music. You wave them away, they say you wept often. That you muttered to yourself. That you refused to lie in bed, perhaps afraid that if you did, you'd never rise again, and then, one March night in 1603, you fall silent, you do not speak again. On March 24th, your body stills, the Virgin Queen. The Gloriana. The last Tudor monarch, gone. You leave no children. No chosen successor. But your counsel reads between your silences and sends for James VI of Scotland, your cousin Mary's son. Yes, that Mary. History has a wicked sense of irony. Historians still puzzle over your final days. Did you know James would take the crown? Did you plan it all along? Or did you simply trust that England, like you, would figure it out? We may never know, but here's what we do know: you ruled for 44 years, you survived plots, plagues, and pressures no monarch should endure. You turned your womanhood into a weapon, your celibacy into a brand, your insecurities into strategy. You became a queen, then a symbol, then a myth, and when they finally laid you to rest in Westminster Abbey, they buried you above your sister Mary, the same Mary who once imprisoned you. Inscribed on the tomb, partners in throne and grave, here rest two sisters, Elizabeth and Mary. But everyone knew whose name history would remember. The bells toll low and long across London. Outside the Abbey, the crowds pressed together, faces tilted toward stained glass and gray skies, hoping to catch a glimpse of something holy, something eternal. You are gone, but you are everywhere. In the coin purses, the portraits, the nursery rhymes. Even the air seems shaped by your absence, but this isn't where the story ends, it's where your afterlife begins, because once you're gone, the crown doesn't fall. It floats, gliding north to land squarely on the head of James VI of Scotland, now James I of England. Your cousin. Your rival's son. The beginning of the Stuart dynasty. Oh, the irony, and the awkwardness, because, remember, James was raised believing his mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, was a martyred saint, and you were the devil in a fancy ruff. But now, he inherits your court, your council, your kingdom. And your ghosts. James is clever. He quickly adopts the tone of continuity. He praises your wisdom and patience. He stages elaborate ceremonies to show he's a legitimate successor. He even leaves your advisors in place, for a while, but here's the twist: he's not you, he's less glamorous, less charming, and far more interested in uniting the crowns than dazzling the people. He hates your wigs, your pageantry, your obsessive PR machine. He prefers books to court masks, theology to flirtation, and England? England misses you, not at first. Maybe. At first, they're curious. Hopeful. The foreign policy shifts. The religious tensions cool slightly. The succession question is over. But soon, your absence feels loud, the court grows stuffy. The art becomes less flattering. The Queen's presence chamber. Renamed. The portraits of Gloriana. Quietly removed. The stars dim just a little. Meanwhile, the myth of you begins to take on a life of its own. You become a golden age in retrospect. A glittering backdrop for poets, playwrights, and future kings to reference with longing. Shakespeare, who performed for you in person, now becomes a chronicler of your age. Though he writes for James, his most iconic histories, Henry V, Richard III, still carry your shadow. His heroines carry your wit. His kings, your speeches. Quirky tidbit: it's believed you once asked him to write a play featuring a bit more merriment. He responded by writing A Midsummer Night's Dream. You allegedly fell asleep during it. Tough crowd, your face, immortalized in countless portraits, undergoes its own renaissance. Artists smooth your wrinkles, brighten your hair, enlarge your eyes. Suddenly, every image of you looks suspiciously 28. Forever. Like the first ever Instagram filter. And your legacy? Oh, it's complicated, because let's be honest, you weren't perfect, you were vain. Paranoid. Ruthless when it suited you. You ruled through spectacle and suppression, and your religious tolerance only stretched as far as your patience. You executed Catholics. Imprisoned dissenters. You colonized Ireland with brutal force, setting the stage for centuries of tension. You never solved the poverty problem, despite noble attempts. Your tax system was archaic. Your censorship strict, but you also stabilized a country on the brink of implosion. You survived political cannibalism. You made Protestantism permanent without burning people on stakes every Sunday. You didn't just preserve England. You polished it, paraded it, and made it feel proud of itself again. Historians still debate whether your reign was truly a golden age or just a cleverly marketed calm before a very bumpy storm. Spoiler, James's descendants end up beheaded, exiled, and generally uninvited from dinner parties. But your time? It feels golden. Maybe it's because of the Armada victory, maybe it's the flourishing of the arts, Marlowe, Shakespeare, Spencer, or maybe it's just because you lasted. In a world that ate monarchs for breakfast, you ruled nearly half a century. Let's rewind a moment. Think back to that terrified girl at the tower, clutching her prayer book, listening for footsteps. You outlived them all. Your father, who never believed a woman could rule, your brother, who never imagined you'd reign, your sister, who tried to break you, your rivals, your suitors, your assassins, even time. For a while, you outmaneuvered fate like a chess grandmaster with poison in her rings. And speaking of rings, remember that one you wore until your final breath? The locket ring? Hidden inside it were two portraits, your mother, and Bullen, and yourself. Two queens, divided by history, reunited in silver and pearl. You never spoke much of and in public. But that ring? That was your whisper to the ages. Now, centuries later, you live on in books, classrooms, dramas, documentaries, even pub signs and board games. There's a certain gin with your name on it. There's a certain style with your name on it. There's even a certain vibe, bold, brainy, redhead with a razor tongue and a lot of lace. That's you. Modern politicians quote you, feminists debate you, cosplayers recreate your gowns down to the last embroidered phoenix. You become a Rorschach test. Every generation sees what it wants in you. The strong woman. The manipulative spinster. The last great monarch. The lonely ruler. The ultimate queen. And still, questions remain. Did you love Dudley? Were you truly a virgin? Did you regret not naming an heir? Did you believe in your own mythology? Historians still argue, and they always will. You'd probably love that, because you understood something few rulers ever do. Power isn't just about laws or armies. It's about perception, and you, Elizabeth, were the master of perception. When people think of queens, they think of you, not because you ruled the biggest empire, not because you had children, or married well, or passed the best laws, but because you told a story, and it was magnificent. You're gone, but your court lives on, in miniature, in mimicry, in memory. The halls that once echoed with your laughter now creak under James's flatterers. They fumble with etiquette you perfected, stumble over dances choreographed for your delight. The gilding peels, the silks fade, but still, there's a sense that you could walk in at any moment, toss a snide comment over your shoulder, and reclaim the throne by sheer force of charisma. Instead, you haunt history. The Elizabethan age becomes a phrase in textbooks and tourism brochures, but really, it's more of a mood, candlelit intrigue, stiff ruffs, tight corsets, and just enough casual treason to keep things interesting. You linger in the margins of every story set in your time. even when you're not the star. And sometimes, even when you're long dead, let's drift back into that golden twilight. The Elizabethan court wasn't just a political engine, it was theater. You didn't just govern, you performed your reign. And every noble, every ambassador, every suitor was part of your ongoing production. Take the masks. These weren't just elaborate parties. They were live-action metaphors, allegories with you always at the center. A goddess here. A nymph there. A fortress of chastity besieged by desire, which, let's be honest, is a little on the nose. But the point wasn't subtlety. It was spectacle. You stood on stage, both literally and metaphorically, as the embodiment of the nation. England wasn't just a land, it was you in powdered form. The costumes, the poetry, the obsession with symbolism. All part of the branding. Quirky aside, your wardrobe inventory included over 2,000 dresses. And no, you never wore the same gown twice. Because what kind of queen would repeat an outfit? Honestly. Even your language became legendary. The way you talked, elevated, sharp, drenched in metaphors, set a tone that echoed through Parliament, the stage, even sermons. You were fluent in Latin, French, Italian, and Greek, and often replied to ambassadors in their native tongues, just to remind them whose throne they were bowing to. And while you spun yourself into a living myth, you made sure England got a glow-up too. Under your rule, the arts didn't just thrive, they erupted. You helped build the world that made Shakespeare possible. The theaters of London were packed with plays that were raw, wild, hilarious, and devastating. Tragedies with stabbed kings and cross-dressed lovers. Histories where war was bloody and often regretted. Comedies where no one ever seemed to recognize their spouse in disguise. Your court-funded exploration. Drake, Frobisher, Raleigh. They sailed into the unknown with royal permission to discover, which, of course, meant claim land that already had people on it. Not great. But in your day, it meant prestige, wealth, maps with dragons on them, and new kinds of spice to mask the taste of salted meat. This was also when England started sticking flags in the New World. Virginia? Named after you, naturally. Because what's colonialism without a bit of personal branding? Historians still debate how much you personally backed these efforts versus simply allowing bolder men to stake your flag while you remained safely inland. But what's certain, your reign set the stage for the empire that would one day stretch around the globe, and as all this grandeur blossomed, so did the machinery beneath it. London's population boomed. Trade expanded. Guilds tightened their grip. You established the poor laws, England's first national approach to welfare, imperfect but groundbreaking. You restructured the currency to prevent inflation and, fun fact, your face was stamped on more coinage than any previous monarchs. Because again, branding. Food shortages hit in the 1590s. Inflation bit hard. There were bad harvests, rising prices, growing gaps between rich and poor. You responded with grain regulations and royal proclamations, but the problems lingered, festering in alleys and rural villages far from your masques and feasts. Religion remained a wound, never quite healing. Your compromised Church of England was always just Protestant enough to anger Catholics and just Catholic enough to annoy Puritans. You walked the line with the skill of a tightrope artist in a windstorm, but the rope frayed all the same. Your speeches soothed. Your spies suppressed. But the tension hummed just beneath the surface. Even your image, so carefully maintained, became a prison. As you aged, you leaned harder on illusion. Thicker makeup. Higher collars. You even wore lead-based cosmetics to preserve your pale glow. Spoiler, not healthy. By the end, you became something close to a living statue, still adored, still feared, but increasingly untouchable. Your court grew quieter. The poets wrote elegies instead of sonnets. The courtiers bowed a little longer. No one wanted to be the first to say what everyone felt, that Gloriana was fading, and then, of course, you did, but let's not rush back to that final scene just yet. let's linger with the moments that made you unforgettable, like that day in 1571, when Parliament tried to pass a law requiring you to name a successor. And you, smiling, gave them nothing, or the time you stood before the troops at Tilbury in armor, not just inspiring them but daring them to doubt your strength. Or that night when the theater crowd erupted in applause after Twelfth Night, and somewhere in the back, you clapped too, gloved hands meeting with just enough force to show the playwright he had your approval. You ruled not just by decree, but by presence, and long after your last breath, that presence lingered. They built myths around it. Gloriana, the fairy queen, the virgin monarch, the savior of England. Even your failures, your indecision, your cruelty, your vanity, got polished until they gleamed like virtues, because in the end, you weren't just a queen, you were a story, and oh, what a story it was. You're still not resting, not really. Your body may lie beneath a marble effigy in Westminster Abbey, but your legend keeps moving. It strolls through centuries, dodging the dust of revolution and reform, sipping tea in drawing rooms, flashing a sly smile from the pages of textbooks. You remain useful. Victorians embrace you as a symbol of proper imperial femininity, never mind the wigs or the weird metaphors about being married to your country. They love your chastity, your strength, your restraint. You're the queen who never let emotion cloud judgment, except for that whole Essex thing, which they politely skip over. Then the Edwardians arrive and decide you're not a chaste goddess but a sexy power player with razor-sharp diplomacy. Portraits from your time get repainted, and now you've got cheekbones that could slice through the Spanish Armada. Later still, feminist historians come knocking, notebooks in hand. Some champion you as a proto-feminist icon. Others critique the empire you helped spawn. Still others just want to know, did you really do it all alone? Historians still argue about that. Of course they do, because you remain the unsolvable puzzle of monarchy. Take William Cecil, your right-hand man for decades. Without him, your policies might have wobbled. Your spymaster Francis Walsingham. Arguably the reason you lived long enough to die in your own bed. These men weren't just loyal, they were instrumental. But they didn't own you, you made them work for your favor. You listened, then overruled. You took counsel, then made it clear who wore the crown. Quirky detail, you once delayed signing a death warrant by hiding it in a drawer for weeks. Like, literally misplacing it accidentally on purpose. That's not indecision. That's imperial ghosting. You held absolute power, except you didn't. Not in the medieval sense. Parliament existed. Nobles still schemed. You balanced a shifting triangle of court, commons, and crown, every day, every year. And yet, you were the one in the portraits. Not them, because you didn't just wield power, you performed it. Let's pause for a second and really look at that performance. Your signature image, standing in an impossibly wide gown, hand resting on a globe, eyes tilted ever so slightly upward as if considering the fate of nations, or maybe just wondering what they're saying about you in Venice. Jewels spill from your ears. Your dress is embroidered with eyes and ears, literal symbols of your all-knowingness. It's part fashion, part surveillance state. Everything was calculated, and that wasn't a flaw. That was the plan. You understood something most rulers never grasp. It's not enough to rule. You have to be believed in, respected, feared, worshipped. And you cultivated that belief with the intensity of a playwright scripting her legacy. And speaking of legacies, you never married. But you married England. You never bore children. But you birthed an era. Your line ended with you. But your story seeded dynasties of imagination. The Stuarts came after you, and frankly, they botched it. They spent too much. Argued with Parliament. Dabbled in absolutism. Lost their heads, sometimes literally. The monarchy after Elizabeth. It never quite reached her level of charisma. They had armies. She had aura. Even the greatest rulers who followed, Victoria, Elizabeth II, got compared to you. Were they as wise? As bold? As brilliant, the answer was always, almost, let's drift back into your public spaces. Imagine, a typical day at court. Courtiers whisper in corners. Pages scurry. Your throne gleams in candlelight. You enter, and the air changes. Conversations pause. Even the dust particles hesitate mid-float. All eyes turn. You smile, slightly. Enough, a man steps forward, hoping to read a petition. He bows, he sweats, you say nothing. Just look, and that look. That's the real weapon, it's not the navy. Not the laws. Not the gilded edges of your wardrobe. It's that look, layered with memory, intent, and unspoken threat. It says, I know more than you think, I've survived more than you can imagine, I am not here by accident, and you are on notice, your court understood it. So did your ambassadors. And even your people, those farmers and merchants who'd never see your face except stamped into silver, somehow knew, their queen was fierce, they didn't need to love you, they needed to believe in you, and they did, even in your mistakes. Take the monopolies crisis. Late in your reign, corruption spread. Royal monopolies handed out like party favors led to price hikes and public anger. Parliament pushed back hard, you could have doubled down. Instead, you delivered one of your most famous speeches, the Golden Speech of 1601. You stood before the Commons, not with anger, but grace. You admitted their grievances were fair. You promised reform. And you ended by calling yourself married to my kingdom, saying your people's love was the jewel of my crown. Cue tears, historians still study that speech, not for what it said, but for what it did. You diffused a crisis with language. Not force, that's legacy in motion, and beyond politics. Your tastes left fingerprints, English gardens. You helped define their shape, cosmetics. Your iconic mask of youth shaped beauty trends for generations. Though again, lead. Not ideal. Even the English language changed in your time. You championed translations of the Bible and classical texts. You supported universities, libraries, thinkers. Literacy expanded. Ideas spread. You didn't just rule England, you helped educate it, and now, centuries later, your name still floats from lips in high school classrooms, museum tours, Netflix dramas. You're not just history, you're a genre. Even now, you remain impossible to pin down. Every time someone tries, your image shifts, just a flicker, just enough to elude the net. Was Elizabeth I a feminist icon before feminism had a name, a master manipulator cloaked in virtue, a lonely woman masking heartbreak with powdered bravado? Yes. And no. And maybe, you were all those things, and more. Let's take a stroll through how others have tried to describe you, across time, across tone, each generation layering its own meaning onto your legend like fresh paint on an already luminous portrait. The Victorians, ever fond of propriety and a good corset, loved your so-called virginity. You were their idealized mother, not a biological one, but the nurturing spirit of empire. They ignored the politics, the pragmatism, the occasional ruthlessness. To them, you were Gloriana, untouched and untouchable, a woman who ruled with wisdom and restraint because she was somehow above passion. The irony? You probably used that very perception to your advantage while alive. Then the 20th century rolled in, and with it, a shift. The scholars got bolder, the biographies juicier. Now, you were the woman behind the throne, except, of course, you were the throne. You were analyzed like a modern celebrity, your love life, your makeup, your temper, your alleged romantic sighs over Robert Dudley's handwriting. The 1960s and 70s brought new feminist lenses. Suddenly, your decision not to marry looked less like tragic isolation and more like a tactical checkmate. Historians still argue, did you simply avoid marriage to keep your autonomy? Or was it a calculated illusion to hold suitors close without ever surrendering the crown? You once said, better beggar woman and single than queen and married. But was that philosophy, or a well-placed dagger at the heart of patriarchal expectation? Either way, the effect was seismic. You proved that a woman could rule without a man. That she could command armies, inspire poems, defeat invasions, and still go to bed alone, with her virtue and sovereignty intact. Let's drift a little deeper into that mythology, because, truthfully, you created it. You designed your persona like a sculptor chiseling marble, the Gloriana gowns, the fiery speeches, the symbolic jewelry. That phoenix on your bodice? Not just fashionable. A statement, rebirth, immortality. You are your own legend, and let's not forget the rainbow portraits, the ones where your cloak is literally woven with eyes and ears, and the serpent in your hand is smiling. You're both the watcher and the watched. You knew your court was a stage, and you played the lead with Oscar-worthy commitment. Even your signature, the sprawling, defiant Elizabeth R., looked like it was flexing. Still, behind all that theater was a human being. Occasionally, she peeked through. There's that letter you wrote when Dudley died. "I am not well," you scrawled at the top. Just that. 3 words. No poetry. No symbolism. Just pain. There's the night you wandered Whitehall alone, refusing food, refusing sleep, refusing to sit, grief wrapping around you like one of your heavy velvet gowns. You were Gloriana, but you were also Elizabeth, a woman who had watched her mother beheaded, her childhood weaponized, her adulthood hunted, who ruled a world designed to unmake her, who succeeded anyway. And maybe that's why your myth endures, because we're not just awed by your victories, we're stunned by your survival. You weren't born to rule. You were almost killed before you could, yet somehow, you emerged from the smoke of your family's destruction more powerful than any of them. Take a second to think about that. You outlived your father's legacy, you outshone your half-siblings, you turned your mother's disgrace into a private emblem of pride. And when you died, you left the nation craving more of you. That's rare, not even all the monarchs who came after could replicate it. James. Efficient, but dull, Charles I. Got a bit headless. Even later queens, brilliant in their own right, never quite managed the theatrical majesty you made look effortless. Maybe it was the timing. The Renaissance crackling like a fire around you. The new world being mapped in real time. The Armada. The theater. The corsets, or maybe it was you, that singular fusion of intellect, flair, survival instinct, and glittering charisma, a walking contradiction who embraced the contradictions, a virgin who flirted shamelessly, a woman who ruled a male world without pretending to be anything else. You were never a symbol of power, you were power, and it shows, even today, when people dress like you for Halloween or TikTok or historical reenactments, they don't just don the costume, they channel the posture. The look. The knowing smirk, because dressing like Elizabeth means stepping into the skin of someone who not only held the world in her hands, but made it believe she deserved to. Let's end this stretch of the story with an image. Picture the older Elizabeth, tired, powdered, draped in layers of white, a crown resting too gently on her thinning hair. She's sitting before a mirror, surrounded by silence. Her ladies wait behind her, still as paintings. Outside, London carries on. Bells ring. The Thames rolls. She lifts one hand, waves them away. Alone now, she reaches up and slowly pulls off her wig. Underneath, fragile wisps of silver hair, a face lined with battles fought in shadows. She stares at herself, not the queen, not the myth. Just Elizabeth, just a woman, and she smiles, because she knows, she won. Now that the candles have burned low and your legend is secured in marble and memory, let's wander through the curious corners of your reign, the bits that don't fit neatly into school essays or royal timelines. The soft shadows, the fringe facts, the moments that reveal the human beneath the crown. Let's start with your morning routine. You didn't rise early. You weren't one of those 5 a.m. jogger types. No, your mornings were long, luxurious rituals. Layers of cosmetics, starting with vinegar-based washes, then pale lead-based foundation, then rouge, then powder scented with crushed rose petals or lavender. Your ladies helped dress you piece by piece, fastening silks, arranging ruffs, pinning jewels in just the right place. It wasn't vanity. It was armor. Each layer transformed you from a human being into Her Majesty the Queen, a symbol, a myth, an answer to every question the court dared not ask. You didn't eat breakfast, usually. You preferred a goblet of wine mixed with water and a slice of manchet bread. You were deliberate, not indulgent. Everything was designed to keep you just distant enough to remain divine, and then, once polished, painted, and powdered, you stepped into your day. Most monarchs ruled through proximity and paper. You ruled with performance. Your progresses, those elaborate tours through the countryside, were part spectacle, part surveillance, part PR campaign. Every year or two, you'd load up the court and roll into some noble's estate, fully expecting them to host the Queen of England for days or even weeks. It was expensive, chaotic, and politically brilliant. You saw your subjects. You reminded them you were real. You sniffed out disloyalty, rewarded flattery, showed off your gowns, and sometimes even danced in public halls lit by torchlight and admiration. Quirky tidbit: during one of your progresses, a town built a fake castle out of painted canvas just to impress you. You knew it was flimsy, but you walked through the gates anyway, complimenting the effort like it was the Tower of London. Because graciousness was also part of the game. Meanwhile, your court remained the most elaborate stage in Europe. You handpicked your ladies-in-waiting, not just for their noble blood, but for their discretion. They were your eyes and ears, your protectors, your confidants. But never your equals, and if they broke the rules, especially the no-men rule, punishment was swift. When one of your maids dared to marry without your permission, you banished her. When another fell pregnant by a courtier, you locked him in the tower. It wasn't cruelty. It was consistency. Your court was your creation. You controlled it like a conductor with a 1,000-piece orchestra. If one note went sour, the whole illusion risked falling apart. Even entertainment had rules. Your favorite pastimes? Dancing, of course. You loved the galliard, which required 6 quick hops per bar, a workout in heels and a corset, to say the least. You also enjoyed music. You could play the lute and the virginals, and sometimes sang, though only in private. Even queens have stage fright. You had a soft spot for clever jesters and sharp poets. Anyone who could make you laugh or think quickly earned a place in your circle. But the moment someone pushed too far, they were dismissed with a smile and a quiet never come back. And yet, you were not without warmth. You gave gifts, rings, books, custom-tailored gowns, to those who pleased you. You remembered birthdays. You mourned when your dogs died. You wrote long letters to distant friends, filled with real emotion dressed in perfect penmanship. Historians still argue whether your coldness was real or learned. Whether the stiff courtly rules were your invention or merely a reflection of your time. But there's one clear truth: no matter the structure, you were always at its center. Let's wander briefly into your sense of humor, because, yes, you were funny, dry, cutting, quick. A Spanish ambassador once dared to say that English women were slightly inferior to Spanish ones. You responded by smiling sweetly and then giving him a tour of your navy. Another time, when a courtier brought you a draft of a speech and asked if you wanted it shortened, you said, "Only if you're willing to shorten yourself." And yet, you understood silence just as well. Sometimes you said nothing. Just looked. Let the pause stretch long enough that the speaker started to sweat. You let silence do the work. It was one of your best tools. You also had deep contradictions. You hated mirrors, but sat for dozens of portraits. You claimed modesty, but walked with an entourage of 20. You punished vanity, but demanded loyalty to your own image. It wasn't hypocrisy. It was strategy. You knew that the more layers you wore, literal and figurative, the harder it was for anyone to touch you. So you swaddled yourself in symbolism. The Virgin Queen. The Gloriana. Astrea reborn, but behind closed doors, you sometimes just wanted peace. You once spent an entire summer reading translations of Seneca. You quoted Cicero at dinner. You wrote melancholy poems, one of which ends with the line, "I grieve and dare not show my discontent." That's the Elizabeth history textbooks forget, the one who felt deeply, even if she rarely showed it. Now, centuries later, your letters are studied for insight into your mind, and your coronation day is reenacted by history buffs in full regalia. There's a pub named after you in almost every English town. Your face is on mugs, playing cards, action figures. Someone once even pitched an Elizabeth I vs. Zombies screenplay. We don't talk about that one. Still, all of it proves one thing: you lasted. In a world designed to erase women from power, you carved your name into the very spine of history, and not with heirs. Not with marriage. Not with war alone, but with presence. You made every room yours, every decision deliberate, every silence meaningful. That's rare, that's powerful, that's Elizabeth. You're still lingering, at the edge of candlelight, at the corner of memory, in the shadow of every queen who comes after. And tonight, as we keep drifting deeper into your world, let's walk through the aftermath. What unfolded once your carefully painted face disappeared from the stage, and England blinked in the sudden absence of your fire. James I ascended to the throne almost too neatly. No wars of succession, no major revolts, no last-minute rivals storming the gates. Just a quiet shuffle of paperwork, some celebratory sermons, and a new king sitting awkwardly on a throne warmed by your legacy. He wasn't you. That became obvious quickly. Where you were calculated, he was careless. Where you measured words like gold coins, he poured them out like cheap ale. Where your court had been tightly controlled, his became a noisy swirl of gossip, patronage, and very bad velvet. And while he managed to keep England politically stable, for a while, he lacked your skill at reading a room. His court fell into factions. His speeches grew rambling. His belief in divine right swelled into arrogance. And worst of all, he tried to be liked more than he tried to be admired. But perhaps his greatest crime, at least in the eyes of those who remembered you, was that he made the crown feel ordinary. Under you, it had shimmered. Now it's Saturday. Still, James brought some positives. He ended hostilities with Spain. He sponsored the King James Bible, arguably the most poetic translation of holy text ever printed. He kept the peace. For a time, but your memory loomed large behind him. He couldn't escape it. Neither could his son, Charles I, who inherited both the crown and a brewing storm of discontent. He pushed too hard. Parliament pushed back. And eventually, well, he lost his head. Literally. Quirky historical twist, they buried Charles I in the same vault as Henry VIII. So in the afterlife, your father and your ill-fated cousin-in-law now lie uncomfortably close. Small tomb. Big tension, but the execution of a king was unthinkable when you ruled. Under your gaze, no blade dared swing at a sovereign. That's part of your legacy too, the sheer authority of your presence. You didn't need to scream or threaten or spill blood daily. You didn't need to flaunt your crown. You were the crown, and people believed it. That's the thing modern historians often miss. In an age without photographs, without videos, without social media to reinforce your image, you still managed to saturate England's consciousness. You were in plays, prayers, coins, portraits, speeches, toasts, and dreams. Even illiterate peasants knew your name and had an opinion about your hair. You controlled your narrative long before publicists existed. Let's talk about that narrative a little more, because while your reign had no shortage of stuff, wars, rebellions, sea captains stealing gold, you were still best known not for what you did, but for how you seemed while doing it. You seemed eternal. You seemed invincible. You seemed untouched by the petty limitations of mortality, even as your teeth blackened, your hair thinned, and your steps slowed. You maintained the illusion of youth and vigor. You refused to let the world see you fade. When your mirror finally cracked, it was in private, historians still debate how much of this was vanity versus strategy. But honestly, does it matter? You understood the power of seeming, and that made you dangerous to your enemies and magnetic to your allies. Let's zoom out for a moment. What did your reign mean? At a national level, it meant stability. It meant a break from the yo-yoing of violent religious reformation. It meant a kind of English identity, new, Protestant, island proud, crystallizing in your image. At a cultural level, it meant a Renaissance flowering like never before. Your patronage turned London into a cultural supernova. Theatre, music, poetry, every medium found voice in your age, even economics shifted, merchants gained power. Trade routes stretched farther. The idea of an English empire moved from fantasy to possibility, but perhaps most profoundly, your reign meant that a woman, alone, unwed, childless, could rule for 44 years, and not just rule, but define an era, and that's what continues to echo. You've become the measuring stick. When a modern queen rises, she is asked, is she like Elizabeth? When a woman takes power, they ask, is she as strong? As clever? As composed? Your example is both inspirational and impossible, and still, you remain a contradiction, the Protestant queen who flirted with Catholic alliances, the virgin ruler whose love letters sound anything but chaste, the benevolent monarch who executed traitors and hoarded authority like it was heirloom silver. You contain multitudes. Let's revisit one last place where you still dwell, language. Many of the idioms we still use were sharpened in your court. The language of diplomacy, of command, of high literature, so much of it echoes with your cadence. The phrasing, the rhythm, the turns of phrase, your speeches are still quoted, your letters still analyzed, and your silence. Those long, strategic pauses. Still studied, not bad for a girl who once sat in the tower, scribbling psalms in the margins of a Bible, waiting to die. You didn't just escape death, you transcended it. You became the stuff of lullabies and battle cries alike. Not many can say that. So yes, the Stuarts tried to move on. The Hanoverians barely mentioned you. The Victorians adored you. And Netflix made you a supporting character in someone else's drama, but you're still the star. You're not just remembered, you're reenacted. Across England, every summer, someone's dressing up as you for a historical pageant. They'll slip into a brocade gown, powder their face, and do their best impression of that famous half-smile, half-regal, half-amused, and fully terrifying if you know what's behind it. In Hampton Court, schoolchildren whisper in the Great Hall, wondering if the ghost of Gloriana might still be lurking behind a tapestry. At the Tower of London, docents tell your story while standing on the very stones where your sister once sent you in chains. The air still carries your breath, your fear, your resolve. Even Westminster Abbey, your final resting place, isn't really yours. You share it. They buried Mary, Queen of Scots, there 2 decades after your death. Not next to you, of course. But close enough for the irony to hum beneath the marble. You can almost imagine the two of you, side by side for eternity, still not speaking, but you get the better real estate. You always did. Let's wander into your funeral for a moment, not morbidly, just curiously. It was spring, 1603. The sky, appropriately English. Mourners lined the streets. Your coffin, draped in black velvet, carried on a hearse drawn by 4 horses, each one draped in more black velvet. Even the horse blinked solemnly. Probably, on top of the coffin lay an effigy of you. Carved wood, painted skin, a golden crown on its brow. Some said it looked just like you. Others said it looked more alive than you'd been for months, and as your body passed, the people didn't cheer. They wept, even the hardened ones, even the ones who had never seen your face, only the back of a coin or a scrap of a tapestry. The loss wasn't just of a monarch, it was the loss of an era. You had become synonymous with England itself. To lose Elizabeth was to lose the heartbeat of the time. Your death, ironically, cemented your immortality, because after you, history didn't feel quite as sparked for a while. James was a thinker, not a showman. Charles tried to be both and ended up decapitated. Later monarchs ruled long but not always well. And some were just wallpaper. You, though, you were a stained glass window in a world of drywall. Let's trace a little of your afterlife through culture. In art, you remained radiant. Painters revisited your portraits again and again. They never tired of the lace, the collars, the wide eyes that always seemed to be watching, even centuries later. In literature, you became a character, then a legend, then a trope. Poets called you the phoenix, the moon, the light of Albion. Historians called you everything from brilliant tactician to Machiavellian nightmare. Filmmakers cast you with razor-cheekboned actresses and voiceovers that say things like "I am England" while battle drums pulse in the background, and in every version, regardless of tone, angle, or century, there is awe, because you are not forgettable. Even your enemies had to admit it. Philip of Spain never got over you. Even after the Armada disaster, even after your rejection of his marriage proposal, he reportedly kept tabs on you. In one intercepted letter, he called you that woman who turned storms to her advantage. A backhanded compliment, but a compliment nonetheless. You were weather. You didn't just live through the 16th century, you were the 16th century, and while your image was built from hundreds of tiny gestures. Words unsaid, dresses chosen, dances danced, it was your constancy that defined you. Others panicked. You performed, others compromised. You recalculated, others fell. You endured. Take, for instance, your infamous stone speech, the one you gave to Parliament in 1586, "Though I be but a woman, yet I have as good a courage answerable as my father had." It wasn't modesty. It was warning, a reminder that your father may have ruled by fear and fire, but you ruled by finesse. And it worked. Now, centuries later, they name ships after you. Cities. Species of roses. Even battles. Your name gets dropped as shorthand for excellence, the Elizabethan era, an Elizabethan performance, a true Elizabeth. But all of this raises a quiet question: were you happy? Historians still argue. You had power, but not intimacy. You had triumph, but not tenderness. You had loyalty, but not family. And perhaps most tellingly, you died alone, sitting on cushions on the floor, refusing your bed, refusing food, refusing final words, not because you were stubborn, but because you knew once you lay down, the curtain would fall. And queens don't bow to endings. Instead, you just slipped away. Letting the world fill in the blanks, letting history write what you had already outlined, letting the silence say the last word. Even your final resting place carries echoes. Your tomb bears the inscription, "Consorts both in throne and grave, here rest we two sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, in the hope of one resurrection." It's poetic, yes. But also strange. Mary was your enemy, you had her executed, and now, there you are, sharing eternity. The symbolism is almost Shakespearean. You would have appreciated that. So here you are, tucked in history's quiet pocket, still shimmering. We're in the final stretch of your story now, but not because your influence ends. If anything, this is where the echoes get louder. The further we move from your time, the more you seem to shine, not dimming with age but gleaming through the fog of centuries like a lighthouse that just refuses to go out. Let's start with that phrase, the Elizabethan age. Other rulers get reigns. Eras. Decades. You got an age. Think about the weight of that. It's not just politics or power. It's a culture. A feeling. Shakespeare's plays, Drake's voyages, Spenser's poems, Ruff's, sonnets, star charts, new worlds discovered and old ones remade. All wrapped up in your name, like a seal on a parchment. Your face has been on everything from postage stamps to £5 coins. In World War II, they even named a warship after you. Because when England needed strength, they called upon you, even if you'd been gone 300 years. And the curious thing? Everyone claims a piece of you. Feminists see a woman who broke through ceilings. Royalists see a sovereign who ruled without ever needing a king. Patriots see the mother of England's rise. And scholars. Well, they still can't agree. Historians argue over whether your virginity was real, political, symbolic, or some combination of the three. They debate whether your delay in naming a successor was strategic or dangerously indecisive. They parse your letters for truth and subtext, trying to unpick the riddle of a woman who never fully let herself be known. Quirky detail: some of your wigs were so heavy they required scaffolding to attach. Your dresses could weigh over 40 pounds. You essentially carried a wearable throne on your back, and never tripped once, but your burden wasn't just silk and jewels. It was myth, expectation, fear, love, and the constant, invisible pressure of needing to be more than mortal, because what would have happened if you'd failed? If you'd married and been sidelined, if you'd borne a child and been reduced to mother instead of monarch, if you'd faltered in battle or wavered in court, the entire scaffolding of England's emerging identity might have crumbled. Instead, you held, more than held, you turned the precarious reign of a queen into a template for strength. And not just any queen, a single, childless one, in a world where power usually passed through bloodlines and husbands. You didn't pass your crown, you embodied it. Let's drift back, just for a moment, to one of your lonelier nights. Imagine the palace silent, your ladies dismissed, the fire dying low. You sit at your desk, quill in hand, reading a letter from some noble or ambassador or cousin asking again when you'll marry, what your plans are, whether England has a future beyond you. And you pause, you stare at the paper, ink frozen mid-sentence, and maybe, for just a second, you feel the full weight of it, how lonely it is to be the future, when the future depends on you never slipping. But the quill moves again, you finish the letter, and you keep going, because that's what queens do. And now, centuries later, your story still comforts and challenges people in quiet ways. Young girls in classrooms read about you and ca woman who wasn't supposed to win, and did anyway. Writers study your letters for elegance, venom, and wit. Actors portray you on stage, trying to capture that flash of steel behind your eyes. Even casual history fans, tucked into beds, half asleep, maybe like you, think of you and feel awe, because you weren't perfect, you were sharp. And cold. And sometimes cruel. You clung to power like ivy to stone. You ordered deaths. You tolerated torture. You let spies worm their way into the lives of your enemies, but you were necessary, and rare, and unforgettable, and there's something deeply comforting about that. About knowing that, once, in a world not so different from ours, full of fear and change and clashing voices, there was a woman who carved herself into legend not by being born extraordinary, but by choosing to become it. So we remember you, not just because we admire you, but because, sometimes, we need you, when the world feels chaotic, when decisions feel impossible, when power feels like a game designed to keep people out. We remember you, and we think, if she could do it, powdered and corseted and constantly scrutinized, maybe we can too. Maybe we can find our own voice, our own posture, our own throne, even if it's metaphorical, because you left behind more than a legacy. You left behind permission to be brilliant, to be stubborn, to rule your own life, and somewhere, quietly, you smile, because that was always the plan. And now, dear listener, as the final pages settle and the candle gutters low in its dish, we arrive at the closing breath of her story. There is no grand procession, no blaze of trumpets or sudden crescendo of strings. Instead, we find ourselves held in the gentle hush that descends when a legend finally rests. The world falls quiet, and her name drifts down into the soft folds of deep time, like snow on ancient stone. You are back where you began. With a girl, barely more than a shadow at the edge of a court, her eyes bright with questions, her life hemmed in by danger. A child born beneath the long shadow of execution, her cradle rocked by fear and betrayal. A nobody, at least in the eyes of those who believed they could erase her name with silence or shape her fate with prison walls and carefully scripted lies. They tried to make you small. They tried to reduce you to a whisper. They used poison pens and sharpened rumors, hoping you would disappear, but you did not bend, and your triumph was not a product of luck, nor of divine grace descending in some sudden moment of rescue. No, it was something harder, something more relentless. It was your will. Your blazing, stubborn, astonishing will. The kind that does not ask permission. The kind that does not flicker, and when the moment finally came, when history paused and opened a space for you, you did not inch toward it nervously or flinch from the weight it carried. You did not lower your gaze or speak only when asked. You did not tiptoe. You strode into power. For 44 years, you ruled. Not only from the elevated seat of a throne or the dotted borders of a map. You ruled through your presence alone. Through every glance, every stillness, every perfectly timed silence that hung in a chamber like thunder. You ruled with your mind, with your movement, with the magnetic precision of a sovereign who never had the luxury of being anything less than composed. A glance from you could settle a quarrel. A frown could stop a council mid-breath. You became something more than a queen. You became Gloriana, the fairy queen of song and story. The golden sun at the center of a turning kingdom. A monarch whose image inspired poets and terrified ambassadors. A sovereign so enshrined in myth that historians still struggle to untangle the woman from the icon. You were not merely a ruler. You were the standard against which all others were measured. The riddle no court could solve, the sovereign no rival could dethrone. You outlived them all. Every critic, every traitor, every noble who once whispered your name with doubt. You stood longer than the storms that rose to unseat you. You endured. You outshone the courts that schemed against you, the tongues that tried to tarnish your name. Every time they predicted your fall, you rose instead. Even now, long after your world has vanished into dust and marble and books, you remain. You remain in the scent of aged vellum in libraries. In the echo of footsteps on cathedral stone. In the dusty corners of spinning globes that no longer chart your empire, but still remember your reach, and yet, beyond all that, beyond the crown and the gowns, the speeches and ceremonies. There was the woman. The quiet one behind the velvet veil. The Elizabeth who remained after the courtiers went home and the candles burned down, the woman who laughed, unguarded, behind closed doors. Who mourned the ones she lost. Who bent over parchment in the midnight hours, composing verses by flickering flame. The woman who danced when the music called, and paused only when the last note faded into silence. Who felt love, held it in her heart, but never fully named it aloud. Who lived among vipers and yet never allowed herself to be bitten. And when the time came, when breath grew shallow and memory softened around the edges, she left the way she lived, deliberate and silent. On a March morning, when the frost still lingered and spring had not yet arrived, she slipped away. No final proclamation. No grand goodbye. Just a quiet departure. A sovereign seated on velvet cushions, surrounded by whispers and stillness. There were no words for history to cling to. No decree etched into legend. Only the final hush, and then, she was gone, not in disgrace. Not in tragedy. But as one who had finished her part. A presence fading gently into absence. A chapter closed not with a scream but with the soft turning of a page. Not an ending. Not a fall. Just that mysterious moment when a myth becomes memory. Even now, hundreds of years later, we still remember. We light candles for you. We wear your face on costumes and coins. We write about you in textbooks, debate your decisions in classrooms, reenact your coronation in school plays. We keep pulling at the threads you left behind, trying to understand, trying to rebuild you from letters and portraits and glimpses, because in a world that cannot stop shouting, you showed that silence, when used with precision, can echo louder than thunder. In a world that has too often doubted women, you stood still and proved that power does not ask permission, and it certainly does not apologize. In a world where memory fades so quickly, where names vanish like smoke, you are still here, not as a wife. Not as a mother. But as something else entirely. A force. A figure. A flame, the queen, the age, the flame that never flickered, even when the wind blew cold, and now, as you begin to drift off to sleep, warm beneath your blanket, your thoughts dissolving into quiet dreams, let one final image settle behind your eyes, you, clothed in white. Pearls draped like constellations across your collar. Your gown rustling softly as you glide through the long gallery of your palace. The night air is filled with the faint scent of lavender and parchment. Your slippers brush the stone floor, which seems to sigh with every step. One hand trails gently along the cool wall beside you, and time folds around you like a cloak. You pause at a tall window, the breeze curls through, lifting your sleeve ever so slightly. Far below, the city of London breathes in its sleep. Chimneys smoke. Carriages rest. Bells wait to chime, and you, Elizabeth, last of the Tudors, stand there with a small, knowing smile, because, in some strange and secret way, the world still belongs to you, and in some deeper corner of history's heart, it always will. So now, with the final page turned and the last candle guttering out, you're safe to rest. No more courtly drama. No more velvet schemes. Just quiet, let your body sink a little deeper into your bed. Let your jaw unclench, your shoulders soften. Breathe in, slowly. Breathe out, softer still. You've walked through centuries tonight. Through stone palaces and storm-tossed seas, through poetry and battlefields, betrayals and coronations. You've seen a girl become a legend, and a legend become a lullaby. Whatever you carry, set it down for now. Let the weight of it all be held by history for a little while. Outside, maybe there's wind in the trees. Maybe rain against the window. Or just the steady hum of silence, your own court of peace. Close your eyes, if they're not closed already. No need to remember it all, history will. You've earned your quiet. Sleep comes now, not with fanfare, but with soft footsteps on old stone, and a whisper through tapestry-lined halls. You are safe, you are still, and somewhere, Elizabeth I, Queen of England, is drifting through a dream of her own.